That night, the Darwin sky was still shrouded in a light haze from the dry season's burn-off. The breeze from Darwin Harbour blew softly, carrying the salty tang of the Timor Sea mixed with the diesel fumes from the fishing boats tied up for the night. The city's lights glowed dimly, reluctant to sleep even though the hour was late. Amidst the quiet, an old fishing trawler was seen chugging unevenly towards Fisherman's Wharf. Its blue paint was peeling. The registration numbers were faded, and from the outside, it looked just like any other fishing boat returning from the sea. But that night, fate had other plans. The boat held a dark secret. A patrol team from a joint NT Police and Border Force operation was conducting a routine check on the waters around the wharf. One of the officers pointed to the fishing trawler, which seemed to be listing slightly. They approached, their searchlight hitting the face of its skipper, a skinny old man named Kevy Wilson. Kev's face looked pale. Sweat beaded on his temples, even though the night air was cool. His gaze was restless. His voice stammered as he answered the officer's questions. He said he was just carrying frozen goods that needed to be unloaded quickly before they spoiled. His voice was pleading, as if desperate to be allowed through. But the officer's long experience made them realize something was off. Kev looked far too nervous. A senior officer signaled for the boat's hold to be opened. Kev immediately panicked. He tried to block them, begging them not to open the cargo, claiming the load would be ruined. But the decision was made. A check had to be done. 2 patrol officers climbed onto the deck, pulled at a rusty iron lever, and slowly lifted the heavy steel door that was sealed tight. A moment later, a biting cold mist billowed out, stinging their skin. But it wasn't the cold that made everyone freeze. From inside the dark space, a strange, heavy, and suffocating stench surged into the air. It wasn't the smell of fish, it was the smell of death. Torches were switched on. White beams cut through the cold fog in the boat's hold, and there, a sight was revealed that no one present that night would ever forget. 49 human bodies lay frozen stiff, piled on top of each other. Pale faces. Some eyes were closed, some half open, as if they still wanted to scream, but never got the chance. Their bodies were thin. Thin clothes clung to skin that had turned blue from the freezing temperature. Several officers immediately covered their mouths, fighting back nausea. Some stood rigid, their hands shaking uncontrollably. The atmosphere instantly turned silent. Only the sound of the harbor water lapping gently seemed to mourn the tragedy that had just been uncovered. That night, Fisherman's Wharf was no longer just a place for boats to dock. It had become a silent witness to one of the most horrific human trafficking tragedies in Australia. This was no longer just a routine patrol, but the beginning of a major investigation that would expose a transnational criminal network. The officers immediately sent out an emergency signal, the boat was anchored, and the news was sent to headquarters within minutes. Behind the stiff faces of the officers, there was an anger and sorrow that was hard to put into words. Who were they? 49 souls, now lying breathless in the frozen hold of a fishing boat. Where did they come from, and how did they get trapped on this fatal journey? The questions hung in the air, heavy as the humid night haze covering the Darwin sky. There were no answers then. Only a heavy silence enveloping the wharf. The Wharf of Whispers. The forensic team was called immediately. A few hours later, they arrived, their faces serious, carrying body bags, gloves, and documentation cameras. The salty smell of the harbor mixed with the sharp stench from the boat's hold. The air seemed to grow thicker, forcing everyone on the wharf to take short, shallow breaths. One by one, the bodies were removed and laid out on white sheets spread across the wharf's floor. 49 souls, now lying still, no longer breathing. Their faces were so young. Some looked like uni students just starting their lives. Simple clothes, thin t-shirts, cheap jeans, and worn-out thongs were the last witnesses to their journey. A forensic doctor, Dr. Helen Carruthers, crouched, examining them with a small light. Many of the bodies were extremely thin, showing signs of malnutrition. There were old bruises on some parts. Maybe from beatings. Her colleague nodded grimly. They knew the cold of the freezer was just the end. Before that, these young people had already suffered for a long time. The click of a camera sounded loud. In the silence, some of the younger officers chose to look away, unable to stare for long. Someone quietly wiped their eyes, trying to hide the tears welling up. At the corner of the wharf, a middle-aged woman named Sharon Mitchell arrived, rushing. She had heard the news that many bodies had been found. With glassy eyes, she looked at the white sheets, one by one. Then, suddenly, she let out a soft sob. That t-shirt. It looks like my son's. Her voice broke, her body swayed, held up by a neighbor. There was no certainty, but a mother's fear was enough to add to the profound sorrow of the scene. Meanwhile, Kev Wilson sat handcuffed to a steel chair. He was an old fisherman from a small community in the Tiwi Islands. He'd been deep in debt to a local loan shark for a long time. When he was offered a job to transport a frozen load for $5,000 cash, he didn't think twice. But now his face was ashen, his body trembling. I didn't know. I swear, I was just told to transport it, he said, his voice shaking. But the cold sweat that kept dripping and his refusal to make eye contact told the investigators he was hiding more than just ignorance. Amidst it all, a small discovery became a breakthrough. From the pocket of one victim, an investigator found a small, clear plastic bag containing a folded piece of paper. When opened, it turned out to be a simple work contract with a faint logo, Asia Pacific Star Performers. It was full of promises of jobs as singers, dancers, or entertainment workers in Singapore. Big pay, free accommodation, but with no clear address. The investigators looked at each other. That flimsy piece of paper might be the only key to tracking down who was behind this tragedy. That night, everyone present knew one thing. This event wasn't the end, it was the beginning of a long journey. A race against time to uncover the truth hidden in the dark shadows of human trafficking. And this is where the story began, at Fisherman's Wharf, Darwin, with 49 souls who were no longer breathing, but left a message that had to be answered by those still living. The hold is opened, the secret revealed. Dawn had just broken over the Darwin sky. The sun appeared slowly behind thin clouds. Its light fell on the glittering surface of the harbor. But the atmosphere at Fisherman's Wharf remained grim. Yellow police tape circled the old fishing trawler, marking it as a major crime scene. Some officers were still busy documenting. Forensics continued their work. Meanwhile, locals stood at a distance, whispering fearfully. In a small room at the wharf, Kev Wilson sat with his hands cuffed. His face was pale, his eyes swollen, his breathing uneven. He had just been through a long night, full of shouting, questions, and spotlights. In front of him sat Detective Superintendent Jack Beamo O'Brien, an officer with a sharp gaze who had led the inspection from the start. Jack stared at Kev for a long time, then spoke with a quiet but intense voice. Kev, if your load was really just frozen fish, why were you so bloody terrified when the hold was opened? Kev bit his lip. He looked down, not daring to meet the officer's eyes. His voice trembled. I'm just a fisher, boss. I don't know anything. I was just told to drive the boat. Jack tapped his fingers on the table. You've said that a dozen times. But how do 49 dead people end up in the hold of a boat you're skippering? That's not something you can just not know. Kev fell silent. Cold sweat dripped from his temples. He tried to take a deep breath, but his chest felt tight. Finally, he said softly, "There was a bloke. He came to my community on the Tiwi Islands. Said he just needed a frozen load delivered. Promised me $5,000. I needed the money to pay off my debts." Jack leaned forward. "Who was this man?" Kev shook his head, as if trying to block the memory. "I don't know him. Stranger. Rough voice. Had a bit of a Queenslander accent, I reckon. Not sure. He just said to take the boat to a certain set of coordinates. Someone else would take it from there. That's it." The room grew tense. The investigators glanced at each other. Kev's answer felt like a half-truth. Jack decided to dig deeper. He pulled out the plastic-wrapped paper found in the victim's pocket. The contract with the Asia-Pacific Star Performers logo. He placed it in front of Kev. "Ever seen this?" Kev lifted his head slowly. His eyes widened for a second, then he quickly looked away. "No, I don't know. I'm just a fisho." His voice sounded even weaker. Jack sighed. He knew the old man in front of him was probably just a small pawn in a big game. But that pawn still held the key to opening the path to the bigger players. While the interrogation continued, the scene outside grew more crowded. News of the 49 bodies had spread quickly throughout Darwin. Dozens of families flocked to the wharf. Some carried photos of their children. Some just came with a slim hope of getting news. Shouts, tears, and prayers mixed into one. Officers tried to calm them, but the anxiety was palpable. In the crowd, Sharon Mitchell stood with a pale face. She clutched a photo of her son, Kyle, who had left a few months ago saying he was going to Singapore for a job. He hadn't been heard from since. Last night, when she heard the news, her heart had instantly trembled. Now she stood among the white sheets covering the stiff bodies. Her hand shook as she lifted one of the covers, looking for any possibility. Every time she saw a face that wasn't Kyle's, she felt both relief and deeper despair. Tears flowed endlessly. In the interrogation room, Jack looked at Kev again. He tried a different approach. "Kev, I grew up in a fishing town myself. My old man worked the trawlers down south. I know how tough life is. But I also know that as seamen, we can't just turn a blind eye when something's not right. If you don't talk now, you're just going to sink with their sins." Those words made Kev bow his head even lower. His shoulders shook. He covered his face with his hands. A soft sob was heard. "I didn't want any of this. I just wanted to pay my debts. I didn't think the cargo was people. I thought it was just fish. But when I saw the lock on the hold, I was suspicious. They told me not to open it, no matter what. I was scared. But I couldn't say no." Jack watched him carefully. He knew Kev was starting to crack. In a calm voice, he continued, "You said there was a man with a rough voice. Think hard. Did he give you a phone number, or any what-if contact?" Kev bit his lip, thinking hard. Then he slowly nodded. He gave me a small piece of paper with a number. Said if there was trouble, call that number. But the paper's gone. Lost it." The investigators immediately noted the detail. For them, a phone number could be a critical entry point. Even if Kev seemed like a fisherman trapped by circumstance, this small detail could connect the missing dots. Outside, the sun was getting high. Journalists had started arriving, cameras in tow. They tried to film every corner of the wharf. Officers set up barricades to prevent the situation from becoming chaotic. But behind all the hustle, one thing was clear. This case was far bigger than just an old fisherman on an old boat. There was a sophisticated network operating behind the scenes. Detective Superintendent O'Brien closed the file temporarily and stood up. He looked at Kev, who was still sobbing. "I'll be back. But remember, every small detail could save someone else's life. If you're really just a fisher who knew nothing, then prove it by helping us." Kev just looked down. Tears fell to the floor. That day, Darwin was no longer the same. Fisherman's Wharf, usually bustling with the laughter of fish-hose, had become a place of mourning and unanswered questions. 49 stiff bodies awaited identification. Families waited for news. And the police prepared to open the door to a massive investigation. In that room, Jack O'Brien knew this was the start of a long journey that would test their courage, their hearts, and their humanity. The wharf becomes a witness. A thin haze still hung over Darwin Harbour. When the old boat's hold was finally fully opened, the overpowering stench immediately assaulted everyone on the deck. The smell was so thick it stung the nose, made stomachs churn, and tightened chests. A young officer spontaneously covered his mouth with both hands, while others stepped back, their faces pale. They knew what they were about to see was not ordinary. Torches were switched on. White beams pierced the darkness inside the hold, and there, a reality was revealed that made time seem to stop. 49 human bodies lay frozen, piled on top of each other like inanimate objects. Some lay on their backs, eyes half open. Some were curled up, hands still clenched as if fighting until their last breath. The bodies were thin, skin blue, thin clothes stuck to their frames. There were no signs of life, only a heavy, profound silence. The senior officer who first shone his torch in could only stand rigid. His hand trembled, his breathing was ragged, his eyes wide with disbelief. In his long career at sea, he had seen drowned bodies before. But this was different. The number was so large, and they were all so young. He closed his eyes for a moment, trying to control his emotions, but a soft sound escaped his lips, "Oh my God." On the wharf, news spread quickly. Locals who heard rushed to gather at a distance. They weren't allowed close, but the whispers had already started. The boat wasn't carrying fish, it was carrying people. People who were no longer breathing. The wharf, usually bustling with the shouts of fishermen, turned into a sea of silence. Officers moved quickly. They called for medical teams, prepared body bags, and documented every detail. One by one, the bodies were lifted from the frozen hold. The movements were done with extreme care, as if they were still alive and deserved respect. Each body was laid on a white sheet spread across the wharf's floor. The morning breeze blew, making the sheets flutter gently, as if joining the morning. The young faces were revealed under the yellow lights of the wharf. Some looked like teenagers just out of high school. Others looked like uni students just stepping into their future. Some wore thin t-shirts with faded pictures. Some only had thongs on their feet. The sight was suffocating for anyone who watched. They weren't just numbers, they were children, siblings, friends who had dreams. The forensic doctor on the team crouched to examine the first body. His hands were covered in latex gloves. He aimed a small light at the victim's face. Many showed signs of severe malnutrition. Cheekbones jutted out, stomachs were concave, and skin was covered in bruises. Some wounds looked old. Maybe from beatings or rough treatment, the doctor whispered softly to his colleague. They were tortured long before they died in this freezer. That sentence landed like a heavy hammer on the investigators' hearts. The click of the camera shutter sounded repeatedly. Every body was photographed, every detail recorded. Numbers were assigned to each body for later identification. But behind the procedural work, many eyes were red, holding back tears. A young police officer quietly wiped his cheek when he saw a victim who looked the same age as his younger brother back home. On the side of the wharf, Sharon Mitchell still stood, her body trembling. She stared at each body being brought out, her heart pounding. When she saw a faded, light blue t-shirt, she sobbed loudly. That's like the shirt my Kyle always wore. Her cries broke, her body went limp. The neighbor accompanying her quickly held her up. There was no certainty it was her son, but a mother's fear was enough to shatter her composure. On the boat's deck, Kev Wilson sat with his head bowed. His hands were cuffed, his body shaking violently. From a distance, he could hear the cries of the victims' families, the clicks of the cameras, and the shouts of the busy officers. All those sounds were like knives slicing at his ears. In his heart, he knew from the start something was wrong. But he had closed his eyes, choosing to take the money to pay off his debts. Now, his silence had turned into a heavy sin. Detective Superintendent Jack Bemo O'Brien, leading the field operation, watched the scene with a heavy heart. He stood among the rows of white sheets covering the 49 young bodies. The morning breeze brushed his face, carrying the salty smell of the harbor mixed with the lingering stench of death. He clenched his fists. In his heart, he made a promise: this tragedy cannot end here. There will be an investigation. There will be justice. The sun slowly rose. Its light illuminated the wharf, which had now turned into an open-air morgue. Dozens of people stood in silence. Some prayed softly. Some stared blankly. Others held hands, looking for strength. Each victim's face was a mirror of sorrow. Each frozen body was a sign of how dark human trafficking truly is. That morning, Darwin was marked by a dark history. 49 souls lay breathless. But their stories were not over. From the frozen hold of an old boat, a huge secret had just been uncovered. A secret that would drag in many names, open up a transnational network, and demand the courage to reveal the truth. Jack O'Brien knew the road ahead would be long and dangerous. But he also knew it had to start here. From Fisherman's Wharf, the silent witness to a humanitarian tragedy. The paper trail of fake contracts. The sun was high by the time the forensic team finished their tireless work on the wharf. Dozens of black body bags were lined up neatly under a temporary tent. The pungent smell still lingered, even after officers had sprayed disinfectant. The atmosphere was quiet, only occasionally broken by the voice of a forensic doctor giving instructions, or the sound of a camera capturing every detail. Each body bag was opened, examined, and its features recorded. Height, facial structure, scars, even the clothes they wore. Dr. Carruthers crouched beside one of the victims. With a small torch, she examined an arm full of bruises. "These aren't new," she said softly. "The bruising is old, like from repeated blows." Her colleague nodded with a grim face. "They didn't just freeze to death. They were abused even before they got into that hold." That sentence made the atmosphere even heavier. Some of the younger officers turned away, unable to look for too long. Some averted their gaze, others secretly wiped their eyes. They knew their duty demanded toughness, but their human hearts couldn't lie. Staring at the young faces, now stiff, anyone would feel sorrow. On the other side of the wharf, victims' families had begun to arrive. They brought photos, ID cards, even clothes their loved ones had worn. With anxious faces, they waited their turn to look, hoping for certainty, however bitter. Sobs broke out in several corners. A father collapsed to his knees when he saw a bracelet his daughter always wore. A mother screamed hysterically upon recognizing the worn-out jeans belonging to her son. Among them was Sharon Mitchell. The middle-aged woman stood, her body unsteady. In her hand was a photo of her son, Kyle, who had left months ago saying he was going to Singapore. Kyle had left home with a promise to work in a restaurant and send money home to help the family. But since then, there had been no news. His phone couldn't be reached. Messages were never returned. A mother's heart felt something was wrong. And now, the news of 49 bodies had made Sharon's world collapse. With trembling steps, she approached the line of white sheets covering the bodies. The forensic officer allowed the families to view them one by one. When the first sheet was lifted, Sharon immediately covered her mouth. Her tears fell heavily. Not Kyle. The second sheet was lifted. Then the third. Her heart broke more. Until the fourth sheet. Her eyes froze. A faded, light blue t-shirt with a faint band logo was clearly visible. It was the shirt Kyle often wore when helping his dad around the house. Sharon's cries shattered the air, her body went limp, nearly collapsing. Her neighbor quickly supported her. "That's my son," she screamed in a hoarse voice. "That's Kyle." Officers tried to calm her, asking her to wait for official identification. But a mother's tears couldn't be stopped. For her, that faded t-shirt was enough to confirm her loss. Detective Superintendent Jack O'Brien, who was nearby, immediately approached. He bowed his head respectfully in front of Sharon, trying to offer strength. We will confirm everything with forensic tests and official data. Please be strong." Jack's voice was gentle, but his eyes were also glistening. He knew the pain of losing a child wasn't something that could be comforted with words. Meanwhile, Dr. Carruthers continued her examination. Of the 49 bodies, most showed signs of violence. There were ligature marks on wrists, bruises. One victim's fingers were broken, as if they had tried to fight back. Note after note was written, becoming evidence that this was not just a maritime accident. This was a planned crime. The news spread faster, across the city. Journalists flooded the wharf. TV cameras pointed at every corner. Microphones were aimed at crying family members. But officers quickly closed off access, giving space for the identification process. They knew this tragedy couldn't be turned into a spectacle. In a small room not far from the wharf, Kev Wilson still sat with a grim face. From behind the window, he could hear the cries and screams of the victims' families. His heart shattered even more. He was fully aware that his decision to accept the offer to transport the cargo had now dragged him into an abyss of sin. In his head, there was only one image: the faces of the young people who died on the boat he was driving. Evening began to fall. The sun slowly dimmed. The Darwin sky turned orange. But the atmosphere on the wharf remained dark. 49 body bags still lay in rows, waiting to be taken to the hospital. Some family members still waited, refusing to go home before getting certainty. Officers took turns standing guard, ensuring the process remained orderly. Jack O'Brien stood at the edge of the wharf, staring at the water rippling gently. The evening breeze carried the salty aroma mixed with the remaining stench of death. He took a long breath. In his heart, he whispered, "This isn't just a tragedy, it's a call to action. There's a dark network that must be dismantled. There are lives that must be saved before it's too late." That night, the wharf lights illuminated the temporary tents still full of sorrow. Darwin became a witness to deep grief. And from here, a major investigation would begin. The investigators knew that behind every body lying still, there was a story that had to be uncovered. There was justice that had to be served. The trace of the fake contract. Night fell slowly on Darwin. The wharf lights shimmered on the calm surface of the harbor. But inside the interrogation room, the atmosphere was anything but calm. There sat Kev Wilson, cuffed, his face weary, his eyes swollen. He had been through a long day, full of questions and pressure. Detective Superintendent Jack O'Brien sat opposite him, staring intently at the old fisherman's face. Jack didn't just see a man trapped by debt, he saw someone who knew more than he was saying. He opened the file in front of him, placing a small, plastic-wrapped piece of paper on the table. This is what we found in the pocket of one of the victims. Kev looked, his eyes immediately widening. Inside the plastic was a simple work contract. The paper was flimsy, the ink faded, with a logo that read Asia Pacific Star Performers. The promise was clear: big salary, free accommodation, jobs as singers and dancers in Singapore. But there was no address, no clear office, just a blurry signature that looked forged. Kev looked down, his lips trembling. He tried to speak, but only a shaky breath came out. Jack leaned closer, his voice firm but quiet. You claim you were just told to transport cargo. But look at this, Kev. These people weren't fish. They were human beings, tricked by false promises. You might not be the mastermind, but you were part of the chain that killed 49 souls. Tears streamed down Kev's cheeks. I didn't know, sir. Honest, I didn't know. I was just offered a job. I thought the cargo was really frozen. I needed the money. My debts were piling up. My missus and kids. They had to eat. His voice broke, full of desperation. Jack watched him for a long time, then placed a hand on the table. Kev, I believe you're not the brains behind this. But you know something. The person who gave you this job must be part of the network. Who was he? Do you have a name, a number, a face, anything? Kev shook his head, his face tensing. He shut his eyes tightly. I don't know his name. He came at night, to my community on the Tiwi Islands. He said, it's a quick job, just take the load near the border. Another boat will take it from there. He gave me an advance. I was too scared to say no. Jack clenched his fist under the table. He knew Kev was still holding something back, but pushing too hard right now might make the old man shut down completely. He signaled to the other investigator to pause. Meanwhile, in the forensics lab, Dr. Carruthers and her team were still examining the bodies. From one of them, they found something else. This time, not just a contract, but a small note with a handwritten phone number. The number looked scribbled, as if the victim had saved it in a hurry. The finding was immediately brought to Jack's room. As soon as he saw the note, Kev's eyes darted nervously. Jack caught the reaction. So you do know this number? Kev covered his face with both hands. His sobs broke out. He whispered hoarsely, yes. That's the number he gave me. The number of the man who told me to take the boat. The room went silent. The investigators looked at each other. A phone number was a door. From there, they could trace who was really behind this network. Jack picked up the note and said firmly, all right, Kev. If you want to make up for your mistake, you have to cooperate. We are going to trace this number. But remember, every second you hide something, more lives are potentially at risk. Kev nodded slowly. Though his face was still streaked with tears, he knew the way back was closed. All that was left was a small chance to fix a fraction of the massive mistake he had made. Outside the room, the wharf remained grim. Families of the victims were still waiting for identification news. The temporary tent was filled with tears, prayers, and desperate faces. Sharon Mitchell still sat on a wooden chair, clutching her son's photo tightly. Her eyes were swollen from crying all day. She hadn't received confirmation, but her heart already knew that Kyle would never be coming home. That night, an urgent report was compiled. It included the initial forensic findings, the discovery of the fake Asia-Pacific Star Performers contract, and the critical information from Kev Wilson. The entire report was sent straight to Canberra, to the Australian Federal Police, AFB, headquarters. Jack O'Brien stood at the edge of the wharf, looking out at the dark harbour. The city lights glittered in the distance, but his heart remained heavy. He knew this night was just the beginning. Behind the flimsy contract and the scribbled phone number, a much larger, darker network was hidden. A network that didn't hesitate to sacrifice lives for profit. Jack clenched his fists. In his heart, he promised he would expose it all, even if he had to risk his own life. Urgent meeting in Canberra. The urgent report from Darwin arrived in Canberra in the early hours of the morning. On the projector screen in the AFB headquarters conference room, horrific photos from Fisherman's Wharf were displayed. Dozens of young bodies, lying stiff. Some still in simple clothes, others only in thin singlets. Next to the photos of the bodies, the flimsy contract bearing the name Asia-Pacific Star Performers was also shown. The meeting room was filled with high-ranking officers, their faces tense. The room was silent, save for the hum of the air conditioner. Detective Superintendent Jack Bemo O'Brien stood at the front of the room, having just arrived from Darwin, his eyes still red from lack of sleep. He looked at each person present, then spoke in a heavy voice, "Colleagues, this isn't just a maritime accident. This is hard proof that a human trafficking network is operating, and it's sophisticated and ruthless. 49 young souls, frozen to death on a boat. They can't be just a statistic. They must get justice." Jack's words echoed in the room. The officers looked at each other grimly. Jack then held up a copy of the flimsy contract found in the victim's pocket. "Look at this. A promise of work in Singapore, big money, free accommodation. But no clear address. Just a fake company name. This is where we start." After that, he divided the instructions. First, every victim had to be identified as quickly as possible, so their families weren't left waiting in uncertainty. Second, Kev Wilson's testimony needed to be dug into deeper. Third, the AFB Cyber Command was to immediately trace who was behind this fake company. Soon after, the Cyber Command team got to work. In a room full of monitors, young analysts stared at lines of code and suspicious websites. On the screen, job advertisements with flashy displays popped up. Easy work in Singapore, high pay, free board, glamorous photos were displayed to lure potential victims. To the average person, the ads looked convincing. But to the cyber team, they were all traps. They traced the code behind the site. A series of IP addresses appeared. A digital trail that couldn't lie. Some posts indeed originated from overseas, mainly Singapore. But there was another pattern that sent a chill down their spines. Some of the IP addresses were traced back to Darwin and Palmerston. This meant the network wasn't just operating from overseas, it had already planted roots on home soil. An analyst named Liam murmured quietly, "So they are not just scamming from afar. They have people on the ground here. Recruiting directly from our own backyard." His voice made the room even more tense. All eyes turned to the screen showing the list of IP addresses from the Northern Territory. Jack, who had been watching, tapped his fingers on the table. "If it's true they are already established in Darwin and Palmerston, then we don't have much time. Every day, there could be new victims. We have to act fast." While the cyber team continued tracing, field investigators began checking money transfer trails. From the victims' bank accounts, several suspicious transactions appeared. There were deposits into a personal account in Darwin, which then moved to a holding account, and finally ended up in an account in Singapore. The flow was layered, like a branching river, difficult to follow. But slowly, the tangled thread began to unravel. Outside the meeting room, Canberra looked normal. Cars moved busily, people rushed to their offices. The sky was bright blue. But behind all the activity, a major mission was being woven. A mission to save lives from the snare of human trafficking. Jack sat for a moment in a chair in the corner of the room. He closed his eyes for a second, remembering the young faces lying stiff on the Darwin wharf. That memory became a fire burning in his chest. He promised a similar tragedy would not happen again. A few hours later, the cyber team's initial report was ready. They had found several social media accounts actively offering similar jobs. They all led to one username that consistently appeared in the ads. An account with the alias TopEndStar88. From there, they found a phone number. The same one Kev Wilson had been shown. Jack stood up again. His voice was firm. This is our way in. From this account, we can pull the thread to whoever is behind the scenes. We won't stop until we find them. That day, the official investigation began. The Fisherman's Wharf case was no longer local news. It had become a major national operation. From an old boat carrying 49 bodies, a path had now opened to a darker, broader, cross-border, and dangerous network. Jack knew the road ahead would be long, there would be obstacles, there would be people trying to silence them. But he also knew one thing: as long as there were families crying, waiting for news, as long as young dreams were being shattered by syndicates, he could not stop. That night, he stood on the balcony of the AFB building, looking out at the glittering lights of Canberra. In his heart, he whispered, "This is a war I have to win." The testimony of Ryan Johnson. A few days after the big meeting in Canberra, shocking news came from Darwin. A thin young man with a pale face and an unsteady gait walked into the local police station. His clothes were rumpled, his eyes vacant, his hair matted. He looked exhausted, as if he had just escaped a long nightmare. The officer who greeted him initially thought he was just a vagrant. But as soon as the young man said his name, everyone in the room fell silent. "I'm Ryan Johnson," he said, his voice shaking. I was one of them. I got out." The news was immediately sent to Canberra. Detective Superintendent Jack O'Brien flew straight back to Darwin. A living witness was what they had been waiting for. The digital evidence, the fake contracts, and Kev's testimony were already strong. But a confession from someone who had been inside the syndicate would open a much clearer path. In a special, tightly guarded room, Ryan sat accompanied by 2 investigators and a trauma counselor. His face was weary, his eyes red, his voice broken. Every time he tried to speak, it seemed as if every word brought back the pain he had experienced. He told the story of his journey's beginning. A few months ago, he got a job offer from an acquaintance. Said there was an opening as a singer in Singapore. Big pay, food and accommodation covered. Ryan, who came from a modest family on the outskirts of Palmerston, was tempted. He imagined being able to help his mother, who had been a widow for a long time. With that money, he wanted to fix their weatherboard house, which was nearly falling apart. However, as soon as he arrived at the rendezvous in Darwin, all those promises vanished. Instead of being taken to an official company, Ryan was taken to a small house on the edge of the city. He was locked in with dozens of other people. The door was locked from the outside. At night, they were moved secretly onto a small boat. From there, they were ferried to Singapore and taken to a holding facility. Ryan's voice trembled as he described the building where they were held in Singapore. An old warehouse with windows sealed shut, a wire fence surrounding it, and a steel door that was always locked. Inside, dozens of people were crammed into tiny rooms. They were forced to sit for hours in front of computers and phones, running online scams. If they refused, they were beaten. If they got sick, they weren't given medicine. His tears fell when he mentioned the name of a roommate. I saw Liam. He had a high fever for days. We begged for medicine, but they just laughed. Until one morning, Liam didn't wake up. His body was dragged out. And I never saw him again. The interrogation room fell silent. Some investigators looked down, holding back their emotions. Jack O'Brien clenched his fist under the table. Anger boiled in his chest. But he kept his voice calm. Ryan, how did you get out of there? Ryan took a deep breath. One night. A few of the guards were drunk. They fell asleep at the front post. I saw a small gap in the back wire fence. With all my strength, I crawled out. My hands were cut, my legs were bleeding. But I didn't stop. I ran into the bushes, hid until dawn. Then I hitched a ride on a fishing boat that brought me back to Darwin. From the worn-out jacket he was wearing, Ryan pulled out a crumpled piece of paper. It was full of pencil scribbles, faint and rough. I drew this from memory, he said. On the paper was a simple diagram, the cramped rooms, the guard room, the main gate, even an old workshop nearby. He didn't remember everything clearly, but it was enough to provide a direction. Even more shockingly, at the top of the paper, Ryan had written 2 names. I often heard the guards mention these, he explained. The first, Anton Ant Novak. Said he was an Aussie. Tall, skinny, cold eyes. He was often ordered to watch us. The second, Mr. Magnus. Everyone called him the big boss. I never saw him directly, only heard his voice. But every time his name was mentioned, everyone was terrified. That testimony shook the room. The investigators looked at each other. The names Anton and Magnus were no longer just rumors, they were part of a living witness's testimony. Jack stared at the rough map lying on the table. His eyes narrowed, his jaw tightened. This isn't just a story. We have a living witness, we have a location. But even more than that, Ryan added in a soft voice, there are still a lot of people in there, sir. They are waiting. If you're too late, they'll end up just like Liam. His voice broke, his body shook, and tears fell again. Jack O'Brien stared at him for a long time. In his heart, he knew this wasn't just about dismantling a network, it was about saving the lives still trapped inside. That night, a new resolve was forged. This investigation couldn't stop at just evidence, it had to become a rescue mission. The undercover operation begins. That night, the meeting room at the Darwin police station felt heavy. A large map was spread out on the table, showing sea routes from Fisherman's Wharf towards Singapore. Next to it lay Ryan Johnson's hand-drawn sketch, showing the layout of the warehouse where he was held. All the investigators looked serious. Detective Superintendent Jack O'Brien stood at the front, his hands resting on the table. He spoke firmly, we can't just wait for more evidence. Every hour, there's a chance a new victim falls into their hands. We need an entry point into the network. All eyes turned to one name, Mick Doyle, a local recruiter in Darwin whose number had appeared in the online ads and who Ryan had heard mentioned at the holding house. The problem was, Doyle was known to be slippery. He rarely met victims directly, usually just contacting them by phone or text. Approaching him required a special method. A young investigator raised his hand. We need bait. Someone who can pose as a job seeker. The room quieted for a moment. Then a young woman stood up. Her hair was tied back simply, her face calm, her gaze steady. She was Constable Sarah Sari Jenkins, a member of a special unit experienced in undercover operations. I'll do it, she said softly, but clearly. I can be a country girl looking for work. Someone like Doyle will trust someone who looks naive. Jack looked at her for a few seconds. You're aware of the risks, Sarah. Every word you say could be a trap. If you slip up, even slightly, your life is in danger. Sarah nodded with confidence. I'm ready. That night, preparations began. A fake identity was carefully crafted. Name, address, even a background story, all made to seem real. Sarah practiced speaking with a slight regional accent, lowering her head to appear shy, and pretending to be nervous every time she spoke. Her hair was put in a loose braid, her clothes were simple, a worn-out t-shirt, jeans, and thongs. Her appearance completely transformed into that of a naive girl from the outback. Doyle's number, which the team had been monitoring, was then contacted. Sarah turned on her phone, her hand trembling slightly. Though her heart was steady, the line crackled. Then a rough voice answered on the other end. Yeah, Mick speaking. You looking for work in Singapore? Sarah took a slow breath and replied in an innocent voice, yeah, mate. I heard it's easy work over there. Can send money back to my folks. Her tone was perfectly naive. Doyle chuckled softly. Too right, love. You stick with me, your life will change. Heaps of M have made it big. But I need to know you're serious. Sarah pretended to hesitate for a second, then answered, I'm dead serious, mister. I can sing a bit, even if it's just country. As long as it's honest work. Her words sounded convincing. Doyle was silent for a moment on the other end, then spoke again in a friendlier tone. Where are you from? Sarah answered firmly, from Catherine, mate. This matched the fake ID she had memorized. Silence again. Then Doyle said, good. Tomorrow afternoon, we'll meet. There's a small cafe on Mitchell Street. You come alone, yeah. Don't bring anyone. The conversation was fully recorded by the investigation team listening from the control room. As soon as the call ended, Jack said simply, he took the bait. Prepare for surveillance. The next day, the Darwin sky was overcast. That afternoon, Sarah sat in a simple cafe on the corner of Mitchell Street. Her hands were damp with sweat. Though her face remained fixed in a shy smile, outside, the surveillance team was scattered. One posed as a parking attendant. Another sat in the next cafe. One pretended to be a street vendor. All eyes were watching one point, Sarah. A short time later, a man walked in. Medium build, hair slicked back with gel. Thin moustache, friendly smile, but his eyes were sharp, calculating. He walked straight to the table where Sarah was sitting. You Sarah? He asked briefly. Yeah, mate, Sarah replied softly. Doyle sat down, looking her up and down, as if assessing merchandise. He then started talking, not with exaggerated promises, but with a cunning story. You know, Rena? Another girl from the NT. Followed me 3 months ago. Now she sends thousands back to her family every month. You want to be like that? Sarah looked down, pretending to be impressed. If that's true, I really want to, mate. What do I have to do? Doyle grinned. Easy. You give me a copy of your ID. Tonight, you come with me. There are other new starters at the house. The day after tomorrow, you'll be working. Every word was captured by the tiny microphone in Sarah's collar. In the control room, Jack clenched his fist. This is it. The proof we were waiting for. But he also knew the game had just begun. Doyle was convinced, but the next step was far more dangerous. Before leaving the cafe, Doyle typed a quick message on his phone. Sarah managed to get a quick glance. Just one sentence, "New package ready for tonight." The message was sent to an unknown number. Jack, who was monitoring, immediately gave the order. "Follow him. Don't let him out of your sight." That afternoon, the operation officially began. Sarah was inside the circle, and Mick Doyle was the door to the larger network. Everyone knew that anything could happen tonight. The raid on the boarding house. That afternoon, after leaving the cafe, Mick Doyle walked casually along the Mitchell Street pavement. His face was calm, his stride confident, as if unaware that dozens of eyes were following him. In his hand, a small phone never left his grasp. His fingers were busy typing messages. In the distance, two plainclothed agents followed at a safe distance. An unmarked car moved slowly on the opposite side of the street, following every turn. All conversations were linked to the control room, led directly by Detective Superintendent Jack O'Brien. His voice was firm in the agents' headsets. "Target is moving west. All units, maintain distance. Don't get made." Doyle navigated a narrow alleyway towards an old block of units in Stewart Park. The paint on the walls was peeling, the wooden door creaked. He opened the door without hesitation and walked into the dark corridor inside. From a window across the way, a surveillance agent reported, "Target has entered the unit at the end of the hall. There are two other individuals inside." Jack gave a short command. "Wait for activity. Do not breach yet." A few minutes later, muffled voices were heard from inside the unit. "Docs are ready. Boat leaves tonight. New girl is set." Those words were enough to make the investigators' blood run cold. Jack raised his hand. "Execute." The door was kicked in hard. "Police? Don't move." Chaos erupted instantly. Doyle jumped in shock. He tried to grab a laptop on the table, attempting to close it, then dropped it to the floor. One of his associates pulled a knife, while the other tried to grab a bag full of documents. But the officers moved faster. Two agents tackled the man with the knife. Another managed to snatch the bag from the associate's hand. Doyle himself had bolted towards the window, intending to jump out. But a strong hand grabbed the collar of his shirt, slamming his body against the wall. Handcuffs immediately clicked around his wrists. In seconds, the small unit became a scene of total control. 3 men lay on the floor, hands bound. A search was immediately conducted. The results made everyone pause for a moment. Under the mattress, 3 laptops were found. One screen was still on, displaying an email that had just been typed. The subject line, "Tonight's shipment." On the table, dozens of SIM cards were scattered, some still in their packaging. There were also 2 phones with hundreds of contacts saved, mostly just short names accompanied by code numbers. In a cupboard, officers found envelopes filled with cash, in both Australian dollars and Singaporean dollars. The black bag that had been fought over turned out to contain transaction records, names, amounts of money, and notes saying paid, all "wait for boat," written neatly. A financial trail that couldn't be denied. An IT analyst, who was part of the team, quickly opened the laptop that was still on. "Sir, there's an email sent just a few minutes ago. Addressed overseas. From here, it's addressed to Singapore. The sender is Doyle, the recipient is an account with the name Maria Costas." That name immediately made Jack narrow his eyes. He repeated it slowly, "Maria Costas. Who is she?" In the temporary interrogation room, Doyle sat with his hands cuffed. His face was hard, his lips curled in a sneer. "You think you've won," he said in a defiant tone. "I'm just a small fish. Without me, the boat still leaves. An investigator placed the evidence in front of him, the laptop, the SIM cards, the money records. Doyle just laughed shortly. That all means nothing. Tomorrow, someone else will take over. You'll never stop it. But his eyes flickered nervously when the investigator mentioned the name Maria Costas. Who is she? Doyle didn't answer. He looked away. His smile slowly faded. Jack, observing from behind the one-way glass, took a long breath. He knew Doyle probably wouldn't talk now. But the email they found was enough. The name Maria Costas was a new door that had to be opened. That night, the old unit in the narrow Stewart Park alley became a witness to the fall of one recruiter. From the outside, the building still looked run down. But inside, the team had found the key to a bigger circle. The digital trail, the transaction records, and the name Maria Costas were now the new focus of the investigation. Jack stood in front of the unit, looking out at the dark, quiet street. The night air carried the damp smell from the drains. He clenched his fist and said softly, "One door is open. Now we have to find out who Maria Costas really is." Maria Maz Costas is revealed. That morning, Parup village markets in Darwin looked normal. Vegetable vendors shouted out their specials. The aroma of spices mixed with the smell of hot coffee, and locals bustled about, browsing the stalls. Among the hustle and bustle, a woman in her early 40s was seen sitting at a small stall selling clothes. Her smile was friendly, her clothes simple, her hands nimble, folding cheap shirts to offer to buyers. Her name was Maria Costas. To the other vendors, Maria was just an ordinary woman. Her life was simple. Every Saturday, she came with a large basket of clothes, then left in the afternoon. Nothing suspicious. But in the Darwin police conference room, Maria's photo was displayed large on the screen. A financial analyst pointed to a graph. Officially, Maria is registered as a small business owner. But the flow of money in her account is unnatural. There are transfers of hundreds of thousands of dollars every month. The source is mostly from Singapore. That amount is clearly too large for a market stallholder. Detective Superintendent Jack O'Brien stared at Maria's photo for a long time. On the outside, she looks normal, even simple. But the bank records never lie. This woman is an important link between Darwin and Singapore. The team immediately devised a strategy. Maria was known to be careful. She rarely used the same phone number for more than a week. Sometimes she stayed at a relative's house, sometimes in a small apartment, always accompanied by one or two young men who were loyal to her. Watching her wouldn't be easy. A few days later, undercover agents began to spread out at Parup markets. Some pretended to be fabric buyers. Some acted as other stallholders. Others sat in the coffee shop near her stall. From a distance, they watched Maria's every move. That morning, Maria looked as usual. She smiled warmly at customers, patiently folded clothes, and even helped a small child who had dropped a coin. At a glance, she truly was an ordinary market vendor. However, when her phone rang, the change was immediate. Her smile vanished, her steps quickened. Her eyes darted, scanning her surroundings. She left her stall, walking down a small alley that connected the market to a row of old offices. An agent followed from a distance. He reported via a small radio. Target is moving towards Stewart Park. Maria entered an old, two-story office with peeling paint. The light inside turned on briefly, then went out again. From the outside, there was no obvious activity. But surveillance records showed a suspicious pattern. Every time Maria entered that office, that night, a rental car would stop out front. 2 or 3 young men would get out, carrying small bags. Maria would stand at the door, give brief instructions, and then the car would speed off towards a small, private marina. From there, the trail always vanished at sea. This pattern repeated several times over more than a week of surveillance. All photos and video recordings were collected. Slowly, the evidence mounted. Maria wasn't just a clothes vendor. She was the intermediary who bridged the victims from Darwin to Singapore. That night, at a secret surveillance post, Jack sat staring at a monitor. A blurry image from a long-range camera showed Maria standing in front of the office, a phone pressed to her ear. Her face looked calm, but her eyes were alert. A few minutes later, a strange man approached, carrying a large black briefcase. Maria took it quickly and went inside without a word. Jack took a long breath. He knew the time was getting close. This woman is no ordinary market vendor. That black briefcase might hold the big secret. "We move tomorrow," he said firmly to the team. "If Maria falls, the path to Singapore will be wide open." That night, the harbor breeze carried a damp smell. The street lights flickered faintly. Darwin felt quiet, as if waiting for a major event. Behind its simplicity, Parrot Markets held a dark secret that was about to be exposed. The interrogation of Maria. That night, the operation in Stewart Park ended tensely. The old office building that had been under surveillance was finally raided. Shouts of police, mixed with the sound of shattering glass, while neighbors gathered at a distance. Maria Costas was brought out in handcuffs. Her face remained cold, she even managed a slight smile, as if to show she wasn't afraid. Inside the office, the black briefcase she had been holding was secured. Its contents made all the officers fall silent. There were no clothes, as she sold at the market. Instead, it was filled with documents with code numbers, boat schedules with red crosses, maps of sea routes to Singapore, and a small phone containing a list of foreign contacts. Among the numbers, two names stood out clearly, Anton and Mr. Magnus. In the interrogation room at the Darwin police station, the atmosphere was colder than usual. A fluorescent light flickered faintly, illuminating Maria's face, as she sat with her hands bound. That slight smile was still on her lips. "You think you've stopped something," she said softly. "I'm just a vendor. Tomorrow, someone else will take my place." Detective Superintendent Jack O'Brien entered the room with calm steps. He didn't speak immediately, just placed photos from the raid on the table. Maria holding the briefcase. Maria standing in front of the office. Maria receiving the item from the unknown man. Still want to say it's a coincidence. For the first time, Maria's smile wavered. But she quickly recovered, lifting her chin with a sharp gaze. "That's not mine. I was just asked to hold it." Jack didn't respond. He placed the small phone seized from the briefcase on the table. The screen lit up, showing the contact list. Two names were clearly visible. Anton and Mr. Magnus. At that moment, Maria's expression changed. She grew restless. Her hands trembled slightly. "You're in danger if you continue this," she said, trying to cover her nervousness with a small laugh. "Those people. They have long arms. There are officials who are on their payroll. Don't think you can just do whatever you want." That statement was the opening. Jack stared at her sharply. "So you do know who they are," he said flatly. Maria was silent for a long time. She looked down, then took a heavy breath. Her voice was soft when she finally spoke. "Anton. Anton Novak. An Aussie. Tall, skinny, cold eyes. All the boat routes, all the money. It goes through him." The room was silent. The investigator's pen moved quickly, writing down every word. Jack was still waiting. His face didn't move, only his gaze was pressing. Maria bit her lip, then continued. But Anton isn't the top. There's one more. Mr. Magnus. A big shot in Singapore. Everyone calls him the big boss. When he speaks, people like me. We just obey. Those words fell heavily in the room. The name Mr. Magnus, which had previously only been a whisper from Ryan, now came directly from the mouth of the main intermediary. The evidence and the confession tied together the red thread that had been blurry for so long. Maria leaned back in her chair. Her breathing was heavy. I had no choice. If I refused, my family would have been the target. You can arrest me. But don't think you can touch Singapore. That's his fortress. Her gaze was cold. The faint smile returned, as if she still held a secret the police didn't know. Jack stood up slowly. He knew Maria was probably still hiding many things. But those two names were enough to move to the next stage. Anton Novak in Singapore, and Mr. Magnus, the big boss. That night, an urgent report was sent to Canberra. Jack's voice on the phone was firm, though tired. We have to coordinate with the Singapore police force. Our targets are in Singapore, and we don't have much time. Outside, heavy rain poured down on Darwin. Water flowed swiftly in the drains. The sound of thunder echoed, as if the sky itself was signaling that a great storm had just begun. The raid in Singapore. A few days after Maria Costas's confession, a small delegation from the AFP flew to Singapore. At Changi Airport, their faces were tense. No flashy uniforms, just plain clothes to avoid attracting attention. Among them was Detective Superintendent Jack O'Brien, carrying a thick file full of evidence and photos from Darwin. At the Singapore Police Force (SPF) headquarters, a closed-door meeting was held. The room was full of maps, satellite photos, and intelligence files. Superintendent David Chen greeted them with a stern look. The 50-year-old man was imposing, but his eyes held the embers of an old vendetta. Mr. Magnus is not a new name for us, he said heavily. We've been hunting him for years. He always slips away because he has hands protecting him. 5 years ago, 2 of my men were killed trying to raid his place. This time, I will not fail. Those words silenced the room. Jack looked at Superintendent Chen, feeling the same determination. From the joint report, it was clear that Anton Novak arranged the routes and fake documents, while Mr. Magnus was the mastermind, with a headquarters in a luxurious penthouse on the edge of the city. But before they could get to him, there was a critical point that had to be hit first. A warehouse near a small, private marina. That warehouse is the heart of the operation, Chen explained, pointing to the map. That's where the victims are held before being sent on. If we successfully raid it, we not only save the victims, but we also cut off his main supply line. Jack nodded. But we have to ensure this operation doesn't leak. If Magnus gets wind of our movement, the lives of those inside become his bargaining chip. The discussion was long. The plan was meticulously detailed, from entry routes, team positions, to communication methods. They agreed the operation would be sudden, no sirens, no official markings. All communication would be over encrypted radio. Chen added in a heavy voice, "We have prepared a marine team. They will secure the waters to ensure no boats get out during the op. If Magnus tries to escape by sea, he'll be trapped." That night, the briefing's atmosphere was different from a normal operation. This wasn't just a job, it was a cross-border gamble. Everyone realized that one small mistake could ruin everything. Before dismissing, Jack stood up and looked at all the members. Remember, the first priority is to rescue the victims. Don't let them be used as human shields. After that, we locked down Anton and Magnus. Nearing midnight, the teams moved to the rendezvous point. Unmarked cars sped along Singapore's quiet streets. The night air was humid, carrying the salty smell of the sea. From a distance, the private marina looked silent. Only a few dim oil lamps flickered on the docks. The SBF's marine team was ready with high-speed inflatable boats. Meanwhile, the AFP's undercover team, blending in with night workers, slowly infiltrated the area around the warehouse. Everything proceeded in silence. Only the sound of small waves was audible. The clock showed 2 a.m. The radio crackled. Superintendent Chen's voice was heavy. All units in position. We move on my signal. From a distance, the shadows of several guards were seen pacing in front of the warehouse. One of them stopped to take a phone call. His expression turned serious. His eyes swept the surroundings more warily. Jack, watching from afar, felt a bad premonition. Have they been tipped off? But the signal was finally given. The undercover team, that was already inside, cut the warehouse's power. Instantly, the lights went out, leaving pitch darkness. Panic-stricken shouts were heard from within. That was the sign they were waiting for. The steel door was battered ram. Police? Don't move. The sound of the ram echoed. It turned out some of the guards were ready. They fired shots from behind a stack of crates. Muzzles flashed against the metal walls. A fierce firefight broke out. The smell of cordite filled the air. Jack ducked behind a wall, giving orders. 2 agents slipped to the side, throwing flashbang grenades. The blast of white light momentarily blinded the enemy. In seconds, the resistance was broken. Several guards were down, others surrendered with their hands raised. The door to the main holding room was finally opened. The smell of stale air and human sweat rushed out. Dozens of people were seen huddled on the floor. Thin bodies, pale faces, eyes full of terror. Some immediately burst into tears upon seeing the police uniforms. Some crawled forward, begging in hoarse voices, "Please. Don't let them take us again." The medical team, already on standby, rushed in. They brought water, thin blankets, and emergency medical supplies. Some victims were too weak to walk and had to be carried out one by one. Sobs of relief filled the room. Jack stood at the door, his eyes wet. In his heart, he remembered the 49 souls who couldn't be saved in Darwin. Tonight, at least, some lives had been rescued. However, the operation wasn't over. From a back corridor, a loud noise was heard. A tall man was running, trying to escape. From his face, Jack recognized Anton Novak. The raid on the penthouse. The back corridor of the old warehouse was narrow and dark. Emergency lights flickered, illuminating the shadow of a tall man running desperately. His breathing was heavy, sweat dripping from his temples. It was Anton Novak, the man whose name had been mentioned by Ryan and Maria. Detective Superintendent Jack O'Brien gave a short command, "Take him alive." Several agents chased after him. Anton tried to blend in with the victims who had just been evacuated, pretending to be panicked like one of them. But his eyes were wide with a terror different from the victims. One agent managed to leg sweep him, sending Anton crashing to the floor. He struggled, trying to get up, but 2 other agents immediately pinned him to the ground. Handcuffs snapped around his wrists. Anton's face was red, his eyes wild. "You think you can just arrest me?" he shouted. "You have no idea who you're dealing with." Jack walked over slowly, staring at him sharply. His voice was calm but full of pressure. "We know enough. You're Anton Novak. You arrange the boat routes, you're the money man, Mr. Magnus's right hand. Isn't that right?" Anton was silent for a moment, then gave a cynical sneer. "If you already know, what's the point of me talking?" Jack leaned in, almost whispering. "Because the more you stay silent, the faster everyone else will talk for you. The choice is yours, Anton." Anton's expression changed. He swallowed, then laughed humorlessly. "Fine. It's true. I'm just an employee. All the routes, all the money, all the boats. It's all controlled by Magnus. He decides who lives, who dies. I just follow orders." Those words silenced the room. A direct confession. The name Mr. Magnus was no longer a rumor, it was a reality, spoken by his own right-hand man. At the same time, the IT team searching the control room on the upper floor found something. A computer was still on. On the screen, a new message had just been received. "Jack O'Brien." The text was simple but chilling. "If you're brave enough, come to my penthouse. I'm ready to welcome you." It was signed with a simple M. Jack stared at the screen for a long time. His jaw tightened. His chest felt heavy. Mr. Magnus didn't just know they were coming, he was openly challenging them. Outside the warehouse, the victims had been evacuated into ambulances. Cries and prayers mixed with the sound of slowly wailing sirens. But for Jack, the job wasn't finished. That night, he stood in front of the warehouse, now riddled with bullet holes, looking towards the city skyline in the distance. That's where the luxurious penthouse of Mr. Magnus was located. The place where their greatest adversary waited, with all his arrogance. Superintendent Chen approached, clapping him on the shoulder. "Tonight, we won," he said in a heavy voice. "But tomorrow, the real battle begins." Jack nodded slowly. He knew exactly. What awaited them wasn't just an arrest, it would be an open war. Mr. Magnus had set the stage. The final showdown. Dawn had not yet broken when unmarked cars slid quietly towards the high-end district of Singapore. The streets were empty, only the sound of night insects audible. Inside one of the vehicles, Jack O'Brien sat silently, staring blankly. He replayed the challenging message found on the warehouse computer, "If you're brave enough, come to my penthouse. I'm ready to welcome you." The penthouse sat atop a glittering skyscraper, overlooking the entire city. From a distance, the building looked more like a fortress. High-tech security, facial recognition, and private elevators. At the SPF Command Center, a brief meeting was held before the operation began. Superintendent Chen stared at the building's blueprints, his jaw tight. 5 years ago, I almost had Magnus. But 2 of my men died in a trap he set. Tonight, I will fulfill my oath. Jack looked at him. This time, we are in it together. He won't get away again. The plan was divided. The main team would approach from the lobby, using warrants to create a distraction. A second team, led by Jack and Chen, would use a secured access route, climbing from an adjacent building's maintenance roof under the cover of darkness. The private elevator's power had to be cut carefully. The slightest mistake, and the alarm would sound. That night, the city air was thick and humid. The team moved silently. Black uniforms blended into the shadows. Every step on the exposed rooftop felt dangerous. The wind howled, sweat dripped down Jack's temples. Though the air was cool, finally, they reached the access panel. A technician pulled out a portable device, attaching it to the wiring. A soft hiss was heard, and then an indicator light went dark. "We're in," the technician whispered. One by one, they slipped into the service shaft. But a silent alarm must have triggered. The elevator shaft lit up. From a loudspeaker, a deep, calm voice echoed through the metal shaft. It was Mr. Magnus. "Welcome, Superintendent Chen. And welcome, Detective O'Brien. You came all this way. For what? To die in my building." Jack tensed. He knew Magnus was playing psychological games. Chen gritted his teeth, looking up the shaft. "Tonight, Magnus, I guarantee you won't escape." Suddenly, the elevator doors at the penthouse level opened wide. A dozen men in full tactical gear emerged, lining the atrium. Their movements were disciplined. They were clearly not just bodyguards, but a well-trained private security force. Jack gave a short command. "Spread out. Find cover." The sound of gunfire erupted. Muzzle flashes lit up the luxurious penthouse. Magnus's team advanced in a tight formation. The joint AFP-SPF team returned fire with disciplined shots. Marble pillars, expensive art, and designer furniture became shields. Chen led from the right flank. His voice was loud. "Push them back. Don't let them hold the atrium." Slowly, the enemy was pushed back towards the main living area. But suddenly, the floor in front of them vibrated. A small explosion shook the room, black smoke billowed. 2 officers were thrown back. "Traps!" shouted an agent. Jack gave a sharp order. Medics pulled the wounded while the front unit kept up the pressure. Flashbangs were thrown. The white light panicked the remaining guards. In that moment, the team surged up the grand staircase. The main door was breached. But what greeted them was a strange silence. A long hallway, with red emergency lights blinking. And at the end, sitting in a leather chair, silhouetted against the floor-to-ceiling window overlooking the city, sat Mr. Magnus. He was alone. He turned slowly, a glass of whiskey in his hand. "An impressive performance," he said, his voice calm. "You've cost me a lot of money tonight, gentlemen." "It's over, Magnus," Jack said, his weapon steady. Magnus smiled. "Over? Detective, this is just the cost of doing business. You caught Anton. You took Maria. You destroyed my warehouse. But the demand never stops. You haven't won. You've just interrupted." "The 49 people who died in Darwin," Jack said, his voice low and shaking with anger. "Was that just an interruption?" Magnus's smile faded. He looked at his glass. "A regrettable failure in logistics. The freezer malfunctioned. They were meant to be assets, not cargo. A waste." That coldness snapped something in Jack. He moved forward, but Chen put a hand on his shoulder. "He's not worth it." Magnus stood up, adjusting his suit. He placed his hands behind his back. "I suppose this is where you arrest me." As the cuffs clicked, Mr. Magnus looked past Jack, out the window at the city lights. "You can cut down the branches, detective. But the root is greed. And you can never arrest that." The arrest of Mr. Magnus and Anton Novak, combined with the testimonies of Maria Costas, Ryan Johnson, and Kev Wilson, led to one of the largest human trafficking trials in the region. The courtrooms in both Darwin and Singapore were filled for weeks. Sharon Mitchell, holding a framed photo of her son Kyle, testified, her voice breaking but strong, ensuring her son was remembered not as a victim, but as a young man with dreams. Kev Wilson, for his cooperation, received a reduced sentence, but as the judge said, the image of those 49 bodies would be his real-life sentence. Maria Costas and Anton Novak, facing decades in prison, testified against Mr. Magnus, detailing the entire operation, from the recruitment in Palmerston to the scam centers in Singapore. Mr. Magnus, defended by a team of high-priced lawyers, remained defiant, but the evidence was overwhelming. He was found guilty and sentenced to life imprisonment, his empire crumbling. The warehouse was shut down, the Asia-Pacific Star Performers website was taken down, and the rescued victims began the long road to recovery, their testimonies crucial. Detective Superintendent Jack O'Brien stood on the balcony in Canberra, months later, looking at the report. The network was broken. But the words of Mr. Magnus echoed in his mind. The demand never stopped.